The year was 1305. London's streets bustled with merchants, horses clattered over cobblestones, and the city exhaled the usual din of medieval life. But this August morning would be unlike any other. The air soon pulsed with something darker, the roar of a crowd thirsting for blood. They came to see a man die, not just any man, but William Wallace, the Scottish knight who had dared to defy the English crown. To King Edward I, he wasn't just a rebel. Wallace was a symbol, a living threat to English dominion. And symbols, as history teaches, must be broken in the most brutal way possible. This would not be a simple execution. It would be a spectacle, a message. A slow, public erasure of both flesh and legend. Hollywood may have given us the noble cry of freedom, but the truth of Wallace's death was anything but clean. His execution wasn't designed for justice. It was engineered for fear. A grotesque, surgical demolition of a man in front of an entire nation. King Edward, nicknamed Longshanks, had orchestrated every detail. Wallace would suffer hanging, drawing, and quartering, the most barbaric punishment England reserved for traitors. But this wasn't about punishing a crime. It was about destroying hope, about dragging an idea, not just a man, through the mud until it bled. To understand why Wallace suffered so horrifically, you must first understand the world that killed him. At the turn of the 14th century, Scotland was in chaos, no king, no clear future. And Edward of England saw opportunity. He sought to turn Scotland into a client state. But Wallace, a minor noble turned warlord, refused to bow. After his stunning victory at the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297, he became the face of Scottish resistance. That made him dangerous to dangerous. Edward didn't just want him dead, he wanted him forgotten. Wallace's fall wasn't swift, it was slow, calculated, and filled with betrayal. By 1305, most Scottish nobles had already bent the knee to Edward. Wallace, still in hiding and refusing to submit, became a liability. His rebellion embarrassed not just the English, but the Scottish elite who had sold out. The hunt for him intensified, and it was another Scot, Sir John Menteith, who finally betrayed him. Captured near Glasgow, Wallace was handed over to English forces. His fate was sealed. The journey from Scotland to London was a punishment in itself. Bound and paraded through towns like a trophy, Wallace was shown off to the English public, mocked, humiliated, degraded. By the time he arrived in London, his name had become a legend. And legends, in the eyes of tyrants, must be humiliated before they are destroyed. On August 23, 1305, Wallace stood trial at Westminster Hall. It was a farce. He was charged with treason against a king he had never acknowledged as his own. Wallace's reply: calm, simple, final. I could not be a traitor, for I was never his subject. The sentence was predetermined. The punishment would be unprecedented. Wallace would be drawn through the streets tied to a wooden hurdle, dragged by horses over stone until his flesh tore open. He would then be hanged, but not until death. He'd be cut down while still alive, disemboweled, castrated, beheaded, then quartered, his body chopped into 4 pieces, to be displayed across Scotland like grotesque signposts of obedience. This wasn't just an execution. It was a ritual of annihilation. The morning of the execution was warm and clear. London prepared as if for a holiday. Vendors sold food. Children clambered for a view. Execution wasn't justice, it was entertainment. Wallace was stripped, tied to the hurdle, and dragged from the tower through the city's busy streets. Blood smeared the stones, the crowd jeered. They threw filth, they laughed. By the time Wallace reached Smithfield, the place of death, he had become a spectacle. Then the true horror began. The executioner hanged him, but not to kill. Just long enough to bring him near unconsciousness. Then came the knife. Wallace was still breathing as the blade tore into his abdomen. His intestines were pulled out, inch by inch, held up to the crowd, then burned before his eyes. The smell of flesh, the roar of approval, but Wallace never screamed. Witnesses say he looked past the crowd as if his gaze fixed on something they could never see. Only then, after a long, calculated display, was his head removed, his body cut into quarters. One quarter went to Newcastle, another to Barwick, another to Stirling, another to Perth. His head tarred and mounted on London Bridge 4 years. Each piece of William Wallace's corpse became a warning, a map of submission, a signal that English justice would not be defied. But Edward had miscalculated. Rather than crush the Scottish spirit, Wallace's death did the opposite. He became a martyr, a ghost whispering through the glens. His brutal end stirred something deeper in the Scottish people. Robert the Bruce, who would later become King of Scots, was reportedly galvanized by Wallace's death. Resistance hardened. The Scottish cause took on a new, uncompromising tone. And the legend of William Wallace grew larger than his flesh could ever contain. The psychological warfare Edward unleashed backfired. Wallace became immortal, not in life but in death. The legal records of his trial, preserved to this day, show that the English crown meticulously planned every step of the execution. It was bureaucracy married to brutality, the worst of what government can become when fueled by fear. Wallace's execution also changed how Europe saw England. Foreign rulers took note. The brutality was impossible to ignore. England's image shifted from powerful to ruthless, from sovereign to tyrant. And yet, in death, Wallace gave the world a different lesson. That freedom comes with a price. That dignity can survive degradation. That even in our darkest hours, the human spirit can endure. Wallace's story, retold for centuries in poems, paintings, and cinema, remains a reminder, not just of pain, but of purpose. We remember him not for the agony, but for the resolve. His scream was silenced, but the message still echoes. Through London's streets, through Scotland's hills, through history itself. Like this video if you believe that some things are worth any price. Subscribe for more untold stories from the shadows of history, only on Legacy File.